are some stories that hit you sideways. Sweden, the country most people picture as polite, cautious, and content to stay out of trouble, has dropped 19 billion on defense. When I first saw the number, I blinked, and then I was looking for the catch, because honestly, what's going on in the north when the famously reserved Swedes start quietly rewiring the rules of military power? And why does Canada, of all countries, suddenly find itself at the heart of this deal? Today, I want to show you how this is not just about fighter jets or radars, although we've discussed quite a bit about that on this channel. It's about how small and mid-sized democracies like Sweden, Canada, Denmark, Norway are flipping the script on global security. They're turning technology and industrial trust into a new kind of influence, and the stakes are way bigger than the current headlines are suggesting. We'll look at what pushed Sweden to do this, how these new alliances work, and what it means for Canada's own place in the shifting Arctic. And quietly, we'll ask what happens when security stops being about armies and starts being about brains, code, and cold weather science. Let me throw this out there very quickly, especially to my Canadian viewers. When you see smaller countries leading the way in defense innovation, does it feel reassuring, or does it make you worry that the world's big players are looking the other way? Drop your thoughts below if you like, and tell me if you think this new Nordic model actually makes you feel safer. Before we dive in, a very quick note. My book, Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Soft Lies, is out now. It's not just about critical thinking. It's about reclaiming clarity in a world full of noise. If you're a builder, a leader, or just somebody who wants to think more clearly under pressure, this one is for you. I've also included a 24-minute companion podcast that walks through the key concepts in depth. So if you prefer to listen and reflect, that's now included as well. All the links are below, including a launch video that goes deeper into the themes. There's also a subscriber discount, so hit that button and check it out when you're ready. And one more very quick thing before we dive in. I'm building a course on AI fluency for people who want to understand the technology shaping the next decade. If you want to help shape what the quiz becomes, I've made a very short 8-question quiz. It takes only 2 minutes, if that, and your answers will directly decide the content that I build next. The link is below. I'd really love your input. Anyway, let's get into it. The first thing to know about Sweden's $19 billion defense transformation is that it's not a knee-jerk reaction. It's more like a society quietly shifting gears after a decade of signals piling up. For most of the world, Sweden's neutrality was a given, a kind of European background music, polite, reserved, quietly innovative, but always outside of the fray. But the North is changing fast. Russia's posture, the war in Ukraine, even the slow melt of the Arctic have all thrown a cold light on the region's old certainties. This new Swedish program, the biggest since the Cold War, is, I don't think, about aggression. It's more about resilience. The goal is not to expand, but to harden the core. Smarter air defense, sharper cyber capabilities, and the infrastructure to actually operate across the vast hostile North. It's not something you can do alone. The fascinating part to me is how this is being built, not by trying to outmuscle the superpowers, but by weaving together networks. That means trusted partners, domestic tech, yes, but also Norway's logistics, Denmark's maritime brains, Canada's avionics and cyber smarts. The whole is supposed to be stronger and crucially more adaptable than any single part. And there is something kind of poetic in the way the Swedes are approaching it, in my view, as if they're quietly testing whether collaboration can be a defense and not just a buzzword. Now, here's where Canada enters the scene in a way that feels almost accidental, but is actually deeply strategic. To most people, Canada doesn't look like a defense player at all. The stereotype is all politeness and maple syrup, vast forests, and maybe some NORAD raiders that nobody really thinks about. But behind the scenes, Canadian industry is now carving out a role as the partner everyone wants when it comes to the North. Let's talk about specifics for a second. Canadian defense exports, especially in 2024, have been dominated by exactly the things that Sweden needs: avionics, simulation, cyber solutions. When Sweden started looking for ways to make their grip and fighter program genuinely next-gen, they turned to Canadian engineering for training and data integration. Canadian simulation software is now in the cockpit of every new Swedish jet. We actually have another video on the current developments of whether Canada is actually going to buy the Gripen jets. Check that one out next if you're curious. But it's not just hardware we're talking about. Both countries are key drivers of NATO's Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. A gloriously bureaucratic name, I know, but a real network that links startups, universities, and military researchers. Through this, Canadian and Swedish teams are working on AI targeting, quantum encryption, even low-temperature materials that survive the Arctic winter. It's the kind of cooperation that doesn't get flashy headlines, but it does get a YouTube video. And it's also a model for how to do security in a world that punishes both arrogance and apathy. I think this is quietly radical, my friends. Now, to understand the power of this moment, you really have to look at the map a little bit. Sweden and Canada are mirror images across the Arctic Circle, both huge, resource-rich, and mostly defined by their cold, harsh northern frontiers. But they're not alone. Denmark and Norway are right there as well, each with their own strategic flavor. Denmark, where I used to live for 5 years and liked it, controls access to Greenland and by extension a good chunk of future Arctic shipping lanes too. Norway, with its energy reserves and NATO experience, has become the linchpin of northern logistics. Now, for the first time, thanks to Sweden's entry into NATO, the region operates as a seismic corridor, a northern arc that stretches from the Gulf of Bothnia to Canada's high north. And this is not just about symbolism here. Sweden's 19 billion plan is designed to make sure that new systems like aircraft, radar, communications, all work seamlessly with Danish, Norwegian, and Canadian kit. This is a huge deal. It's not just plug and play in technical terms. Standards are being synchronized so that if something works in Kiruna, it'll work in Winnipeg or even in Nuuk. The result is a shared defense infrastructure that is both economic and strategic. Canadian companies are already supplying key avionics, radar components, and secure data links, with side benefits that go straight into jobs and GDP. Every cross-border contract is another thread in a web that is slowly binding the North into a single intelligence shield. And this is where the excitement comes in my view. It's not just about defending territory, but about building a network where each country contributes what it does best. And the result is more than just the sum of its own parts. The real twist, in my view, is that the new frontier is not about hardware, but about data, code, and orbital infrastructure, my favorite. Sweden's modernization sets aside over $2 billion for cyber resilience and space-based communications. Canada is already a digital powerhouse in these areas, but now it steps in as both collaborator and architect. The two are now co-designing Arctic satellite constellations, secure, low-latency networks that keep communications open even in the wildest weather. They're working on orbital surveillance platforms to spot both military and environmental threats, like illegal shipping or a sudden ice melt. On the ground, Canadian and Swedish engineers are building quantum-resistant encryption systems. This is insanely cool, right? And they're sharing expertise on how to harden networks against interference. If you ever doubted that nerds now shape the front lines of power, this partnership is definitely the proof. Now, there's a kind of quiet, understated excitement here. The recognition that real deterrence now is less about tanks and more about the ability to move information faster, more securely, and further north than anyone else. And for Canada, this means something very rare, not just exporting parts, but exporting know-how, standards, and digital muscle. It's a shift from being a supplier of things to being a supplier of solutions and quietly of influence, right? It should be easy to see all of this as just another defense story, but the economic ripple is just as interesting in my view. Sweden's investment is projected to create over 25,000 high-tech jobs, not just for Swedes, but for Canadians and others in the corridor as well. Patent cross-licensing, joint research, and shared training programs are now standard. Canadian companies that cut their teeth on the Arctic radar or simulation software are finding themselves with export deals across Europe, not just Sweden. For the first time in a generation, smaller suppliers in Winnipeg or Montreal are feeding directly into NATO's modernization pipeline. There is a lesson here for anyone interested in how alliances really create wealth, in my view, that it's not through military spending alone, but through the creation of innovation networks that can last decades. And maybe the most quietly exciting part of the story is philosophical. Sweden, Canada, Denmark, Norway, these are not superpower countries, but they're showing what it means to play the long game. By investing in technology, trust, and interoperability, they're creating a template for middle powers everywhere. It's not about stockpiling the most weapons, but about building the smartest systems, the kind that make you a partner everyone needs and not just a customer. It's a model built on precision, on shared stewardship of the Arctic, and the humility to admit that strength is increasingly a team sport. For anyone who cares about the well-being of ordinary people, this should be encouraging. I know it's encouraging for me. It's proof that the future of security and maybe even prosperity belongs to those who can collaborate and not just compete. To me, this whole video is a kind of a quiet revolution. The world's coldest regions, once seen as remote, even irrelevant, are now the proving grounds for a new kind of alliance, digital, pragmatic, and low on ego. And as much as these are stories about hardware and budgets, they're also stories about thinking clearly under pressure, about how the places that used to be on the edge are now at the center, shaping not just how nations defend themselves, but how they define cooperation. So I'm going to leave you with that question again. Does this Nordic Canadian model make you feel safer or just more aware of how quickly the world can change? Let me know in the comments below. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, if you want to understand how to navigate the noise, the hype, and the complexity of our current moment, I think you'd really enjoy my book. It's called Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies, and it's written for people who want to stay grounded, think clearly, and live in reality, even when the world makes that feel definitely a bit impossible. I've also included a 24-minute podcast episode where some of the ideas behind Awake are unpacked in a more relaxed, conversational way, perfect if you prefer to listen while walking, driving, or just taking a break from screens. You'll find every link down below. I'd love to know what you think of it. And as always, thank you for being here and for thinking through these questions with me. If you like the conversation, consider subscribing for more, and don't forget to check out these other videos that I've linked here as the natural next step for a deeper dive.